Northmen,
Burners,
breakers.
I consider the matter closed.
Welcome to this interview. Today we are so happy to have JOE ABERCROMBIE joining us here. Thank you for coming here. It is a pleasure to have you on the channel. This is ahead of the most recent release, which is going to be The Wisdom of Crowds, coming out, I believe, September 16th.
Oh, he's got one.
He's got one. The whole collection.
Look at that.
There we go.
Can't
So
have it
many
all.
books.
You can never have too many copies of Wisdom of Crowds.
That is going to be the
It's true.
first of many references we make.
I suggest everyone should buy at least two. At least two, preferably
At least
more.
two.
Maybe an audio book and an ebook as well. I don't know. I can say.
You got to always have one on the shelf and one in your hand, so it's good to have two.
And then audio, listen to that as you're reading as well. So
Yeah.
let's not be greedy. Come on. We got to do that.
Absolutely.
Excellent. And this interview is brought to us very kindly by The Broken Binding, a really excellent indie bookshop. They are stocking The Wisdom of Crowds very soon. I believe you've signed some copies, haven't you, Joe?
I signed 300 copies for them yesterday.
Excellent.
I was in the warehouse yesterday signing 3,500 copies for Waterstones.
Wow.
And so it was my particular delight to be told, actually, could we have another 300, please? Another half pallet to get through. But yeah, it was great. It's lovely to have, independent booksellers keeping it real and selling signed stock. And they've been really proactive and exciting. They seem to have a great following and a lot of people on Twitter, following what they're doing. And yeah, it's lovely. You can never have too many independent booksellers.
Exactly. Yeah, Broken Binding are awesome. We'll have a link to their site in the description below, and we've got a 10% discount code as well, which you should use to buy all of Joe's books. That's our advice for today.
Maybe even twice.
Maybe even twice. You've already gone over that.
So Joe, then, first question, no pressure. Elves or dwarves?
Oh, elves, man.
No hesitation there. No hesitation.
No. I mean, elves are classic. Elves are varied. Elves you can have different kinds of elves.
Yeah,
My elves are different. You can have evil elves. You can have tall elves, short elves, little elves, hiding elves, secret elves, sexy elves, dangerous elves. You can have all kinds of elves, but dwarves, they're just like four guys with beards. That's it. Isn't it? I mean, that's elves, you have high elves, dark elves, forest elves, mountain elves, all sorts. Dwarves are guys with beards.
You'll never be bored of elves, will you?
No, the design's always the same on dwarves. I like dwarves, under the right circumstances, but they're not the gift that keeps on giving. There's always
Once you've seen them
something.
once.
And they got the pointy ears.
Gimli.
Pointy ears alone. A whole world of excitement out there. So yeah, elves.
They're missing out.
Good choice. I like it. Yeah.
But now, before we get further into the interview, mate, we're thinking maybe if you give a pitch for The Age of Madness and The Wisdom of Crowds, get people excited over it. If I imagine they already are, but get them even more excited about it.
Well, The Age of Madness is really starts with the world of the first law and has all the wonderful, juicy virtues that my books always do, like rich and vivid characters doing horrible things to one another. A rich vein of dark humor in amongst a witheringly cynical worldview. And it takes that approach to fantasy and sort of pushes it towards the Industrial Revolution, really. I've always been fascinated by worlds that are in flux and change and these social and cultural and economic forces erupting up to disrupt everyone's lovely plans. And so the Age of Madness is really all about that. A fantasy world colliding with the Industrial Revolution and the hijinks that ensue. And The Wisdom of Crowds specifically is obviously the last book in the trilogy. So in a way, you're unlikely to buy that one first. Maybe people should buy that one first, because then they'd realize their mistake and they'd have to buy the others.
It's a good way to lure them in, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But it does that thing of, it brings the many threads together in a thrilling and exciting collision of sex and violence and rich character detail and that kind of thing. And it's be hugely satisfying. Conclusion, you'll laugh, you'll cry, probably wet your pants a little bit.
Probably.
And all that good stuff.
Everything you want from a fantasy book.
Yeah, we both cannot wait to read the finale. It's been building up for so many books now, and really looking forward to see where all these threads lie. And I have a feeling it's not going to be a Disney ending. Somehow, through some experiences.
I just decided I was done with the punishing cynicism, and I was going to go for rainbows all the way. And it ends with this lovely scene of all the characters sitting around a campfire, hand in hand. Stale Nightfall, and also chatting about how to make their garden grow. And scenes there with Ricker, and they're sort of, talking about how to nourish young, new, exciting startup ventures. And it really is just, everyone coming together under the tutelage of Bayaz, who's working the barbecue for everybody. And it's just, a lovely upbeat finish.
It sounds like a beautiful scene.
Spoiler alert.
Oh no,
me.
Yeah. So somehow I feel that's not going to happen, but maybe in the future you could write an alternate.
Are you
ending.
calling Joe a liar? Come on,
never.
Let's not go too far, shall we?
I think the thing is, you wouldn't want to be predictable for kind of totally withering cynicism any more than you would for kind of shiny, obvious, heroic optimism. So you always want to have those two wolves in balance, if you like.
Yeah.
So I might write a happy ending one of these days. You never know.
Maybe. That links quite nicely. I saw in your acknowledgements you said that Gillian Redfern is your editor and she is like Bayaz. So in that scenario, who does that make you? You Glocta, Jezal, anyone else?
Well, yeah, Jezal, obviously, in that particular scenario. I mean, well, a combination of several people, really. I have the self-awareness of Jezal, the coordination of Glocta, the self-awareness of Logan as well. I've got the pity of Savine, the effectiveness of a young Leo. All these many qualities that are brought together in one man.
So the perfect ending to the trilogy, as well as the perfect fantasy author. Yeah, how have you made this for yourself, Joe? You've built this from nothing, so congrats to you.
Well, it's been the work of years. It didn't happen overnight.
What I've noticed is
overnight.
I think you've sneakily managed to persuade people to read a 9-book series without saying this is a 9-book series. So that is very impressive. It's not like a Wheel of Time where you read book 1, I'm committed now, and I don't really want to read all 10 books, but somehow you've managed to lure people in.
I mean, slightly seriously, although I never get more than slightly seriously, obviously. It was always the plan that it should be a little bit modular, because that was one of my frustrations with fantasy when I was a kid, that you'd go to the bookshop and then have book 7 of the series and book 9 of the series, but you couldn't pick up the first one. And, seeing all that stuff on the shelf is kind of intimidating, a bit off-putting. But some people love that huge weight and that vastness of tapestry, of course. But I wanted to write something where people could, dip in a little bit, which is why I tried to do, a trilogy, then 3 individual books, and then another trilogy. But yes, I have ended up writing a 9-book epic, I suppose you could say. But then people who've read them all in order always say, you must read them all in order. But there are quite a few people who've read like one of the standalones first, and then gone back, or started with the Age of Madness. And actually, although maybe you spoil a few things, it works that way too, because you get to meet the characters for the first time, then you see how they got there, and that I think has its own charm.
Yeah, it works both ways.
Yeah, definitely. And we've actually gone through them all that way, haven't we, through publication order, and it's immensely fun. But it must be quite good as well to read it backwards, because you've written them in a way where you meet characters and their familiar faces pop up every so often when you need a certain character in a certain space, and you can make the links forwards and backwards as well. So that's really good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the nice thing about a big world and a lot of history and a lot of characters is kind of all that stuff you have to draw on without making a huge effort.
Yeah.
You can kind of just bring a character in and a couple of lines which might seem entirely offhand to someone who hasn't read the rest, but people who have read the rest maybe know the history and can extrapolate all kinds of things. And so there's a lot of fun to be had out of a sort of long-term lived-in world like this, I think, in a way.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as you said, because you can pick any one of them up, if anyone goes back for a reread as well, that they wouldn't have to start from the Blade itself again, would they? They could start with Age of Madness or one of their standalones, and that just works really well.
Yeah, and I think there's always a bit of a difficulty with write as a fantasy, write as a huge series, you're always slightly a prisoner of that first book. You know, it's the first book you write. It's probably not the one that you write with the most craft and forethought. You know, so The Blade itself is a wonderful book, obviously. But, you know, it's a little bit lumpy from a plot point of view. Perhaps doesn't, you know, if I was writing it now, I would give the reader, I'd pull the reader along a little bit more, you know. It has a charm of its own. I still really like that book, but I think there's always this feeling of, you know, people will pick up your first book, and your first book's maybe not always your best book. So it's nice that there are other ones that they can dip into. And I've tried, I think, although they're obviously the books have a lot in common, I've tried to do something slightly different each time. You know, I think as a writer, it's easy to get into a furrow, especially if you have any level of success whatsoever. You know, it's very easy to kind of stick with what works. So it's important to keep pushing yourself and trying slightly different things. That means that different readers will respond to different books in different ways, and there'll be a broad spread of favorites, hopefully, in the end.
I'm sure that'd be boring for you as well to write the same thing over and over again, even though, you know, obviously don't want to flatter you too much, but we find The Blade itself really good. You know, it's genius in our opinion, how the characters are crafted. But obviously as an author, you've written 9 books in this world, and you wouldn't want to write the same one over and over again, would you? But saying that, I'm sure you're going to have lots of fans now after they read The Wisdom of Crowds saying, we need more First Law. Are you doing First Law next? So can you tell us a little bit about your next project, perhaps?
No.
Simple as that.
I mean, a little, only because there isn't that much to tell yet. I mean, it's a new thing, different world. It's kind of silly in some ways. It's a bit ridiculous. Some would say half-assed. I don't like that as a description. I like it as an approach.
I'm sure you don't.
Yeah, so it's sort of, the idea was to do something that would be kind of fun, high in magic and ridiculous stuff, loads of monsters, elves, funnily enough.
Sexy elves, wood elves, and
the variety.
These are nasty elves.
Oh yeah, nice.
Very nasty, or at least that's you think they are, but are they actually the good guys, or are they not? Oh, who knows? You'll have to read the book and discover. So yeah, elves, popes, cardinals, stuff like that.
More than one pope then?
Well, only one appears in this book, but I mean there are others around.
Sure, yeah.
One appears in the book and she's 10. So, you know, it's one of those books.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I'm sure we're very looking forward to reading whatever you write next. We've really enjoyed the Shattered Seas, which is amazing as well. You know, would you say that's YA? YA is kind of a funny term people use nowadays, but what would you say about that?
I mean, I'd sort of say it is and isn't,
which
is non-answer, total non-answer. I kind of I sort of wrote it as YA. I mean, I guess I'd written the first one was at the adult end of adult, I guess. And so I wanted to write something different tone, different length, kind of different feel. And so writing something that was kind of potentially for younger readers as well seemed to dovetail with that. But it was written really more for just the sort of reader I was. 16, 17, which, let's be honest, was not radically different from what I am now. You know, it's slightly short, be, slightly more interest in younger protagonists and so on. But, I don't feel it's vastly different. And the idea always was to write something that, my established readers would hopefully still like to some degree. But to write something that's fast and short and kind of much tighter with a sort of different world. And so it ended up being kind of YA, but, YA is a bit of an interesting one because no one really knows what it is exactly.
Yeah.
And in a way, is it sold as YA or is it not? It's a back question, because if something's sold and marketed as YA, then it is YA.
Yeah, sure.
Especially in the States where it's a very distinct thing with its own, section of the shop, its own festivals, its own writers and editors, and it's very, very distinct there. So in that sense, it was kind of sold as much as adult fantasy, really.
Sure. Okay.
Adult fantasy, but it's funny in some countries, in some territories, it's been sold much more as YA, and in others much more as adult. And so in Germany, say, they just sold it as another one of my adult books.
Yeah.
And as a result, people maybe didn't respond to it that great because it wasn't what they were expecting, you know?
Yeah.
It's all about expectations. I mean, I just wrote a book I wanted to write rather than, you know, trying to tick a set of boxes, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Young protagonists really is the
Yeah.
main thing. Young protagonists, shorter length, more snappy. And because you've got young protagonists, you naturally have those kind of themes of coming of age and facing the world and deciding who you are, which are kind of YA staples. So I guess it's sort of YA. I mean, if you like YA and you want to buy YA, I'd say yes.
Yeah.
If you don't like YA,
Yeah.
totally different thing. It's whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the trouble with the labels of like YA and grimdark, isn't it? That sometimes people can get the wrong idea. But I'd say the strategy that it's got it's YA in the sense that young adults can read it, but it's not got a lot of the tropes that we associate with that label.
Yeah, I mean, I still would want it to be kind of shocking and dark and kind of surprising, you know, and unheroic in some ways, in the way that my other work is, because that's sort of what interests me, and that's the stuff that interests me. I want stuff to be shocking, and I did when I was a younger reader too. I still found things that were dark and surprising, interesting. So I guess it still has that element to it. Yeah.
Awesome. And we were talking about that idea of craft a bit earlier, and I was wondering, I believe that you wrote Age of Madness kind of back to back and then went to the first installment and edited it. And I was wondering, did you find that experience to be very different, and did you prefer it, or did you really prefer just going one book at a time?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was always, and you know, right from the start, when I thought I'm going to write another big adult trilogy, I felt like I had to write a draft of the whole thing, albeit a very rough draft. It's funny because even when I was writing Half a King, the idea with that book was to write the first quarter and then sell it on the basis of the first quarter in a treatment. And I wrote the first quarter and I thought, I can't really make this as good as I want to without writing the rest. They often say that the front should be the last thing you write, you know?
Yeah, sure.
Because then you know what you've got. How can you put the wrapper on it until you know what's in it?
Yeah.
So, likewise with the trilogy, I sort of felt very much that with the first law, you know, although I wrote the books one at a time, by the time the first book came out, because, you know, I made a deal, I'd written half the second book, and then it was a year and a half till the first book actually came out. And so the third one was nearly finished by the time the first one came out. So I kind of had that luxury of knowing how it was going to end and revising the first one, knowing what was going to happen. And I felt like I had to do that again. Like, you know, if I knew the end, then I could really make the front work and make the whole thing, you know, coherent as a package. And also I kind of felt like I didn't want to get into the position of writing a first book, sticking it out there and saying, whoa, next year the next book will come, and then getting into difficulty and then you know, having to put it off, because there's always this pressure, you know, to get the next book. And so you've got to resist that a little bit. So both commercially and creatively, it seemed, you know, not only the obvious thing to do, but pretty much essential, really. This. There are different kinds of series, and so, you know, it's not always the case, but in this case, I felt like I did. And so, I drafted the whole thing, and that meant kind of writing the first book. The first book took maybe a year to draft, because, you know, you've got new characters, new ideas, you're trying to out, it's a bit of trial and error that goes on. But once the first one was drafted, the second two went very quickly for me. They took about a year for the other two to do. And then I had a kind of really rough draft, and that meant I could look at it and think, right, I know what I've got, what I need to do, and I could rewrite the first one, feeling confident as I ever get, that it was going to work properly, you know, and that it had a proper end. But each book then still needed a lot of work after that. But it meant we could schedule a publication, and I could be pretty sure I'd have them ready a year apart. So I mean, it worked great, really. And I think if I did a similar thing, I'd try to do the same again. I mean, it's a little worrying, because, you know, you're always feeling like, oh, if I spend a year or two out of the marketplace, will people kind of lose interest? Will the booksellers move on to younger, more exciting authors? And so there's always a bit of concern there. But I think it has worked well, and it's, from a creative point of view, vastly better to do it this way, because there's nothing worse than, writing a first book, putting it out there, and then getting to a second book and thinking, God damn, I should have done this, or that character should have been like that. Or if only I could go back now, make that twist work better. And of course you can't. Whereas if you've got the whole thing there in front of you, you can just pick it apart. Writing the standalones taught me that, Best Served Cold. I very much, I hated writing that book. And it wasn't until I got to the end that I really realized, oh, okay, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Once I got a draft, I thought, right, I see. And then I kind of wrote it again, not totally wrote it again, but I chopped a lot of stuff out because I knew then what it needed to be, and so I knew what didn't fit, and I could make the characters more focused and see what I needed to do to make it work. And so I think you've got to, whatever the length of the story, you need to write the story as a whole and then publish it after.
Well, I mean, I think from a reader's perspective, that is so rewarding because you have a lot of twisty turns and clever little twists in your books, and I think when you can see that it's seeded from the very beginning, it's so rewarding. There's quite a few in the first series, and we got some big twists in The Trouble with Peace, which I'm really looking forward.
We're still reeling from, aren't we?
Wrapped up in The Wisdom of Crowds as well, and so it must feel rewarding for you as well as the reader to know that that's the journey is going on the whole time, and it is threaded right from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to have a plan and an idea for how things will work and then try and make them work. With twists and stuff, it's a difficult thing because you're always trying to, make them surprising, but at the same time, make them natural. Once they've happened, you want people to think, of course, that makes sense. You don't want them to think, well, it's got to make sense. And if it makes sense, there'll be some people who pick it in advance, so there'll always be people who say, oh, I saw that coming. But of course, you will see some things coming. And pitching it in the right way, I think is a bit of an art, and it works for some and not for others. But I've always liked things that are surprising and that have twists and surprises. So there's a couple in the third book, hopefully.
I reckon you'll enjoy reading this trilogy back then when hopefully you do in the future. I saw on your blog that you reread through, is the First Law trilogy, wasn't it? And Best Served Cold when you was it when you were writing Red Country, or when you're doing a little
I mean, when I come towards the end of a book, I reread them all. It's the only way I've got to really keep the details straight in my mind. Because I mean, there's no system of note keeping or kind of filing cards that will remind you exactly of what's happened and who knows who and where they met each other before and what all the little exchanges have been throughout that amount of work. So I'll reread them again, probably after a first draft or after a second draft, at some point where I've got time to incorporate a few ideas if I see something that I've missed or that I could use, some character or bit of history that might be adapted into the new book somehow. So that's how I keep it straight. And generally, with a couple of exceptions, generally I enjoy them quite a lot. Exactly the kind of book I like.
That's perfect. Do you ever find yourself, laughing at your own jokes, your own dark humor?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely.
And then your wife's like, "What are you laughing at, Joe?" And you're like, "Oh, just my own jokes."
Chortling away, chortling away in my study at my own jokes. I mean, the nice thing is that, if you leave it 2 or 3 years, then you forget enough.
Yeah.
There are things that you don't remember and that still seem kind of can catch off guard. I mean, generally I enjoy reading the old stuff. And of course, I listen to it sometimes as well because Stephen Pace, who does the readings, is fantastic. And he brings a whole new element to it and, makes things funny that I would never necessarily have thought were funny. And, he listening to him is a whole added layer of entertainment.
I always say that The Heroes is my favorite standalone because of just the way he does Gorst's voice. It's just so funny. And I can't help but laughing when he does his monologues about war and everything. It's like a really high-pitched Judge Holden sometimes, which I just find so funny.
Yeah, he just gets it. He just totally gets what I'm trying to do, He gets the attempt to do humor. He gets the balance between the humor and the serious, and he just does, brilliant voices. I mean, some of them are just, the Costco is just absolutely brilliant. Cromarty Fail's brilliant. I mean, there's quite a few that are, superb. I think it's great to hear it get that kind of treatment. He's just got great timing.
Yeah.
as well. He has great comic timing. It's quite something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm imagining if the first law ever comes to the big screen one day, hopefully, fingers crossed, but it would be very hard for those people that have listened to the books to not imagine those characters with those voices. So hopefully if they ever do a TV show or a film, then they can try and get Stephen Pacey's advice on it perhaps, and try and take some of those voices away. But you worked in TV editing, didn't you?
I did.
So
I did a lot of
if that ever came to a fruition, do you reckon would you want to be a big part of writing it, like kind of George R. R. Martin did with Game of Thrones, or?
This is a difficult one. Yeah, I would. Yeah.
We were trying to think, what's a question Joe wouldn't have been asked before about films, which he's heard hundreds of questions, but yeah, we thought you would want to be involved.
The difficult one with films and stuff is that pretty much anyone who's written fantasy is going to have something going on.
Yeah,
probably, because it's been such a big thing with Game of Thrones, and that's kind of proved it's very doable. And there's obviously a lot of stuff in development at the moment, but until anything really is genuinely happening, there's never much point talking about it.
Yeah.
You talk about it and then it goes away, and it's sort of
everyone excited, and then you haven't heard for 2 years, and they're like, oh yeah. So that's fair enough.
It's just annoying because then all that happens is people ask you about it constantly, and you've got nothing to say. So I try to not talk about it too much. But yeah, I would love to be closely involved. Funnily enough, so I did talk to George about this very question. About the whole business of adapting stuff for TV and so on. And I mean, I think his feeling was that he wishes he'd been more involved, properly in the room as a writer and a showrunner, sort of full time on the show. So I think the thing is, some writers like to just step back and say it's a different thing, it's nothing to do with me. Others would love to be very much involved, and I think I would love to be very much involved. It's hard to see your baby handled by someone else.
Oh, it must be. I mean, like you said with Stephen Pacey, he just gets it, doesn't he? And he completely understands how the characters should be and should come across, and the timing as well. So, who else knows it as well as Stephen Pacey? Well, you know the world far better than he does. So it'd be good if you were involved as well. But let's move away from the TV, as you can't talk too much about it. So
actually, I had a question. I had a question kind of related, but for the books, that they do feel at times very cinematic and like they're so vivid. And do you think that is part of your experience as a film editor? And do you go into writing these scenes and action with that intention, or does it just happen kind of naturally?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the intention generally is just really to put the reader in the head of the character as much as possible. That's really what the approach I think has always been, insofar as there is a conscious approach. Is to just get you in the head of the character, see things through their eyes, and sort of suffused by their emotions and their feelings about the whole thing, and to make every bit of writing, whatever it might be, whether it's an action scene or a conversation, or walking through the streets of a town, or anything really, to be the experience of that character, and to really feel like it's written by that character, it's narrated by that character, and it has their voice and their feel, and is kind of the way they see the world. That's the writing I really respond to well myself, is writing with a vivid voice where you really get a sense of the character. And so that's what I try to do. I think editing was definitely a big influence on me, because some of those skills of kind of how you pace a scene, how you can enter and leave a scene, what you need, what you don't, what you can focus on and what you can ignore, those are sort of universal. And it's funny, when you were talking about script writing earlier, in a way that boils it down even more, or it's a midpoint between the sort of editing visual art and the writing, where you're sort of using the words to imply very strongly what you're seeing, what the cuts are, the sort of ways of showing what the pacing of a scene might be. And so I think, that experience of editing was vital. I mean, also I got to sit with a lot of documentary directors and producers who are kind of very skilled with scripts and see how they'd, cut things right down to its smallest essence. Documentaries are interesting because there is no script generally. It's sort of, you just have all these bits and then you've got to stitch them together into a coherent narrative, and you can swap stuff around, move stuff about, rethink what's your central argument, how you're going to stick the Lego bricks together. And so, yeah, it was definitely important. But, everything you do in life, I think, finds its way into your writing one way or another. Your writing is a kind of a meal cooked out of all the ingredients of all the stuff you read, all the games you play, all the movies you watch, and the things that happen to you. So it all finds its way into the stew somewhere along the line.
That boiling pot that is your book writing.
I guess that lends to the idea that you said that a lot of the characters are basically just a different part of yourself, which some people may find a bit worrying.
I find it worrying. Yeah, I mean, it's
just honest about it.
Weird. It's weird, right? I mean, when I write dialogue, it's me talking to myself. Don't ask me about the sex scenes. It's just weird. The whole thing's weird. But the strange thing is that very quickly they start feeling like people. I mean, not people that you have a kind of relationship with, not people you feel emotional about, but you get this sense of, well, they'd say that. They wouldn't say that. That's not the way they talk. That's not the way they do things. And you get that quite quickly and quite strongly. And I don't really know where it comes from. I mean, I like to take all the magical thinking out of writing if I can, because I think it gets in the way.
Sure.
And the more you can think of it as bricklaying, as plastering, as a trade, a skill, where you just do the time. The plasterer would never say, sorry, mate, not feeling it today. You'll have to wait. I'll come back. Maybe the muse will have visited me in a couple of weeks. Maybe I'll do more then. So with writing, I think it helps to look at it the same way. I mean, you may run into trouble, but it helps to think, right, it's an empty space I've got to cover with words. Let's just put some words on it, and then the muse visits he who is already working. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's when you're working that you start getting inspired. So yeah, it's important just to keep plugging away. And now I've plugged away so much I've forgotten where we started. What was the question?
About how characters, how they are part of you, and also talking about that idea of how it comes to you gradually, that, as you said, the muse. Do you sometimes have characters that come to you straight away, but others that you have to grind away at it a bit before you really get their voice and then go back?
Have you been in my head? That is exactly true.
Secretly yesterday.
Yeah, some do just spring onto the page fully formed. I mean, often the sort of more minor ones, that are free to be the comic relief or to have a little tick, like say Friendly, Better Served Cold. He's obsessed with numbers, and that's his thing. He has one thing, he's obsessed with numbers. Well, he's obsessed with numbers and he's very violent. Everyone's very violent.
Yeah, we'll stick with the numbers.
Him and his
first.
cleaver, eh?
The numbers is his thing, and then he has short little chapters where there's some gags related to numbers generally, and that works well, does the job. But it doesn't have to do much heavy lifting within the story. It's kind of light relief to some of the other stuff. Whereas Monza, say in that book, is very much doing the heavy lifting. She's the one who is driving the plot along. She's the one who's making the decisions, so the decisions have to make sense. Friendly's just following his nose. Yeah. You never say to yourself, would Friendly do that? Does that, because he does what he's told.
Yeah.
It's simple. It's like, right, in that sense, what's her motivation? How does she think? And then she's also changing, and she's different to how she was in the past, and the past influences the present. There's loads and loads to think about and get wrong. So those characters are naturally much, much harder to kind of do. And generally, as with that book, it's not until you get to the end of the book that you sort of start thinking, okay, so it doesn't work there. That bit doesn't work. That she doesn't start in quite the right place. She needs to start more ruthless, or she needs to, change more at this point, or this is a key moment. We need to work on that. And so, those more complicated, more difficult characters often are harder to write. And, I'd say that was probably true of Age of Madness as well. The four central characters who are, Leo, Savine, Orso, and Rika, all were, you know, to some degree challenging at one time or another. There were moments where they were all, you know, hard to work with. Ricker's voice is quite easy and natural to me because the northern stuff is kind of comes quite naturally to me.
Yeah.
And also was kind of fun right from the start because he doesn't really care, and he's kind of witty, and that sort of worked quite naturally. But they all needed a bit of work. Whereas, you know, Clover, say, as the equivalent of Friendly, you know, he's not a one-trick pony, but he's relatively simple. You know, he's there to sit back, watch stuff going on, make wry asides, but, you know, he's not doing the heavy lifting, so he was very easy to write.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Yeah, I mean, I love reading all of those characters. Was it tricky kind of having the characters related to people you'd written before? You know, did you feel like you needed to, they need to be kind of similar, but their own person? Did you feel like you were maybe writing them again, just in a different skin when you started?
Yeah, I mean, I think as with the whole thing of writing within the established world, you know, you have this huge advantage that you don't have to draw any more maps.
Yeah.
You know, and come up with there's lots of history there already. There's lots of things you can draw on, and there's lots of personal history as well that you can kind of have, and relationships and things that are in the background. But there's also a weight of stuff to think about and to consult and to make sure you get straight. And I think, you know, with the characters who are children of previous characters, you have that same situation, really. You know, there's a lot to draw on when you think, okay, so this is the daughter of Glockter and RD, who are, you know, characters you know really well. Well, straight away you think, whoa, that's a messed up upbringing, surely. You know, that's a weird set of parents to have. That's an intense and extreme pair of personalities. What kind of parents would they be? You know, what kind of interaction, what kind of relationship do they have? And what sort of relationship do they have with their daughter, you know? So I think you think there is a responsibility and there's a difficulty, but at the same time, it's what an opportunity. You know, what sort of character is this? Straight away, I'm excited. I'm interested to see what that person's like. You know, likewise with also, you know, so Therese and Jezal, and there's a lot of water under the bridge there as well. So straight away thinking, oh, what sort of character emerges there? And from that position of being the crown prince, that expectation, that kind of that having it all that privilege. What does someone do when they're served all up on a silver platter? How do they turn out? You know, so I think it was more a case of feeling like, oh, these are golden opportunities to work with the stuff that's already there, and that was generally exciting. I mean, it's also the case that with the First Law, the characters are very isolated when they start. So Logan's specifically on his own. You know, he's trying to survive totally separated from everyone and start afresh on his own. Glockter is a kind of loner. I mean, he has his practicals, but really he's sort of a total outsider, a spurned outsider. Jezal is sort of within a group, I suppose, but he's young. So he's young, he's unformed, you know, he's facing the world for the first time. And his parents don't much come into the story. And Pharaoh, you know, total loner, outsider, plucked completely from everything she knows apart from anything else. So they're all these loners.
Bit of a theme here.
Yeah, a bit of a theme. Absolutely, it is in a way. Age of Madness is the exact opposite. You know, all the characters are within these groups of support, of friends, of family. So, you know, Savine, and also obviously, you know, have both parents alive and very much influencing who they are. Leo's totally in the shadow of his domineering mother at the start, and has his group of entirely straight and heterosexual male friends around.
Of course.
Of course. And you know, Rika is daughter of the Dogman, and she has Nefail and Shivers, and all these people who are kind of around her. So although they step out of the shadows of these people a little bit as the series progresses, they are very much within these groups. And I enjoyed that a lot. That was kind of something slightly different to work with. And that sort of history, they're all very rooted into their surroundings and their cultures. The First Law, a lot of people would step out of their culture. You know, Glockter goes off to Dagoska and tries to wrestle with this mad situation he's in. The group wander off to Nowheresville in the middle of nowhere and have adventures, you know, facing weird situations. Wes goes up north where he doesn't belong, and Logan comes to Adria where he doesn't fit in. So everyone's like a fish out of water the whole time.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas these characters tend to be much more within their, working within their own system. So Savine is totally an insider, a socialite, a networker who's, surrounded by people she knows and is very good at pulling on the strings of that web. It's a very different set of characters. And so that was enjoyable. And of course, Wisdom of Crowds, then everything just turns upside down and flies apart completely. And everyone's fish out of water because the world has gone mad.
Where's that Disney ending gone?
Yeah, hang on a minute.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the ending, though.
Yeah.
It all comes together at the end. And it's
That's the
all
last
nice.
page.
They learn so much during this time of turmoil that they learn to love. I think it's fair to say.
Your characters are famous for learning that moral, obviously.
It's a love.
But it is interesting hearing that you've got some of those similar themes running throughout all the books in the First Law world. But as you said, you like to write something slightly different. And it's interesting, perhaps looking at how maybe you've changed as a writer from your original trilogy all the way to Age of Madness. And would you say you're a very different writer now and that you approach it very differently, or mostly the same with just some subtle changes?
I mean, I'd say no, in the sense that the fundamental idea of, I write type point of view with a cast of half a dozen, points of view. The First Law and Wisdom of Crowds, they're consciously the same sort of approach. I want them to feel of a piece. Likewise, the standalones are not dissimilar in that regard. And that approach of trying to put the reader very much in the head of the character and, giving each point of view a feel and a voice that is hopefully distinctive. That's all much the same, really. So I don't think it has changed massively. I mean, I think I've got better at it in some ways. You kind of, when you start, you have things that are in easy reach, if that makes sense. You have these concerns and these ideas and these characters who've been with you a long time. Yeah. You have a way of looking at the world, that means that the first book people read of yours is going to make an impact in a way that no other can. I mean, Game of Thrones is still way my favorite George R.R. Martin book, because when I read that book, I was like, wow.
Yeah, sure.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It's the way it deals with fantasy, So although he did bigger and better and kind of wilder things over time, that book still is like, well, that's the book for me.
Yeah. Nice experience.
So,
story.
Yeah, you start off, you do the things that are in easy reach, and then over time you kind of have to reach a bit further. Sure. to try different things. And so I think your inspiration maybe drops in a way, but your craft kind of improves, and hopefully one, compensates for the other. So you reach further and you try new things, and I've got better at, there's a lot of things I've got better at. I think I achieve a good result much more quickly than I used to. I used to kind of pick over and over and over a scene. So when I first started and I was writing the first scenes of The Blade itself, I'd write a paragraph, then I'd go over it and I'd cut it down, I'd rewrite it, I'd rethink it, I'd write the next paragraph, I'd rethink that, and then I'd go back to the one before. And every day I'd reread what I did the previous day and edit it and rethink it and redo it until I've got my head into the voice, and then I'd write a bit more, I'd rewrite that, I'd go back and rewrite that. And I was just constantly rewriting, which is kind of how I figured out, the pacing and how to do things. I was sort of experimenting with it. These days, my first drafts, come out all right. They come out reasonable. And this Age of Madness, the whole idea with the first draft was just to smash through a first draft really fast. Yeah. Because although that method of endlessly rewriting means you go to a point, it does mean that you spend a lot of time that you could be doing other things with. If you smash out a rough draft, then it's much more economical, because you'll quickly see a lot of structural things that you need to change, and you get an idea of very good idea of how to change the start quite radically to fit the whole thing. So it's much more efficient, and I've got this method now where I go through and I revise with certain things in mind. So I tend to write a first draft, then I'll write a second draft that brings everything into line with how I'm seeing the book once I've finished the first draft. So it gets the key building blocks in place and hopefully sorts out the major issues, gets the characters consistent, gets the arcs feeling right. And then I've got these kind of phases of revision where I look chiefly at the characters first, and then one where I look chiefly at the setting, and then one where I kind of just look at the detail of language. And each of those gives me kind of a different thing to look at and work on. And so it's just steadily refining and trying to give everything as much distinctiveness and personality as you can, you know. So the setting one, I'll do things like, I'll have a conversation, and the conversation could almost be anywhere. It's just two guys talking or two women talking or whoever it is.
Yeah, sure.
So then you start thinking, right, where's it happening? What's the room? Is there anything about the room that makes this interesting? So I cut a room with like hunting trophies in Trouble with Peace.
Yeah.
I thought, that's interesting. Hunting trophies everywhere. It's Leo's room, so he'll have some manly nonsense, you know, hunting trophies, appropriate. And then, you know, the thoughts, because it was Savine's point of view, I think. So her thoughts are kind of about, she brings that into the conversation that's going on, you know, his head would look good on the wall, that sort of thing. And then you think, you know, what's the light like? What's the time of day? What's the weather? What's the temperature? Do any of those things bring up thoughts and feelings in the people that are involved? Do they change the tone of what's going on? Just trying to give everything, it doesn't have to be a lot, it's just a line here, a line there, but trying to give everything a feel that it's distinctive, you know, and then I'm doing the same with the characters so that you try and get as much kind of arresting detail in there as you possibly can. And that hopefully triggers more thoughts and personality, because it's that personality you're always really trying to aim for.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I love how you talk about it as a craft, that, you know, you're learning and you're always thinking about how to improve as well, you know. And one thing that we've noticed is that, you know, as people want to learn the craft ourselves, we notice that you use a lot of like active verbs, and your word choices feel very, you know, carefully formulated. They're very different to lots of other writers. Kind of feel like there's a Cormac McCarthy kind of influence there. But I do have to ask you, why the word squelch?
Well, it's a lovely onomatopoetic word, isn't it? It kind of, I just enjoy the word. But it's also an intensely unromantic word, you know, and I like unromanticness in the sense that a lot of fantasy I read as a kid, you know, was quite sanitized, both in its sort of approach to the people and their personalities and their way of seeing the world, and the events, you know. So the violence was quite idealized. The romance and the sex, if there was any, was very soft filter, you know, very transformative, very positive. And I suppose I wanted to take a sort of dirtier, grittier approach to every aspect of it. And that includes the use of the word squelch.
Thank you. I just had to ask.
Well, and now you know.
And there really is no romanticism in any of your worlds, really. Even, you know, if we talk about war as well, I always I think in the Heroes, there's a battle scene where you kind of head hop from someone's fighting and then someone kills them, and you go to that perspective. Casualties, that's it. And I love how you write that. And it feels kind of like a piece of your writing now, where you do it in certain scenarios within kind of in the Age of Madness as well. It always makes me think of the Revenant, the scene, the battle at the beginning of the Revenant, if you've seen that. With where the Native Americans attack, don't they? And it goes from character to character. But, you know, when did you kind of decide to use that? Where was your inspiration for that kind of head hopping?
So yes, I mean, that was the first time that I did it in the Heroes, and I suppose the original idea. Have you ever heard of Aeon Flux, the animated?
No.
But you guys are probably too young. Oh my god, probably too young to have heard of that. So it was on when I was in my teens, actually.
Sure.
So yeah, it was a while ago. But there's an episode of that called War, which basically, Aeon Flux is this weird kind of assassin in this weird future world animated thing. Yeah. And God knows how it ever got made. It's completely mad. It's quite interesting to watch. But in this particular one, she kind of parachutes into this war zone. There's loads of war going on. Then she gets killed almost straight away. Yeah. And it suddenly follows the guy who killed her, who's like an anonymous nobody, but they've all got these helmets on. And he pulls his helmet off and he has this amazing hair. And then he goes off on this mad rampage. And after 30 seconds, he gets killed. Yeah. And it follows the next thing that's going on. So you can kind of see where I sort of got this idea a little bit, I suppose. But the idea then, I suppose, was that, you know, point of view and getting quickly into the heads of the characters and trying to give an idea of the person had always worked well for me. And I felt like I could do that quickly and effectively. And it was a sort of opportunity to do lots of intense and silly stuff, you know, and have really weird and wild people that you wouldn't want to have, you know, lingering around through your whole book, but it's kind of fun to dip into. And it worked very well for that method also of obviously trying to show the progress of a battle and the way that the fronts might move and the ebb and flow and you know, how a battle works. So it just worked very well for that particular use. And I mean, also in the Heroes, I think I did a thing with an order passed from hand to hand and it kind of goes astray and goes to the wrong place. It was a sort of attempt to show how the chain of command goes wrong and, you know, weird little details can have these huge effects in the chaotic system of a battle. So it worked great for the Heroes, and it worked so great, I thought, well, I can't not do that anymore. So I think I did it a couple of times. And then I started doing it here, partly because Age of Madness feels like this, you know, social study a little bit, up to a point. I don't want to be too pretentious, but it feels like this kind of slice right through society. And so those chapters are a sort of opportunity to show lots of scattered data points, you know, because you have, say, Savine, who's right up there at the top and also right up there at the top of society. And you have, you know, Vic, who's often right down there at the bottom, and Broad likewise. So you've got a few people scattered around, but I wanted to show all kinds of other people, you know, immigrants and workers and bosses and just all kinds of people. And for that, it's a very useful thing for just giving this sense of the variety of opinion and feeling and background to all the people in society. Kind of makes it feel, you know, which is nice.
Yeah, it perfectly captures the kind of the horrors of war or revolution or, you know, whatever you're trying to tackle. And it feels like you feel the impact, whereas rather just sticking with one character and you see, you know, this very tiny section, you get to really spread out, don't you? And see all of the effects that is having on the populace, which makes it feel even more real. And it feels like it's kind of a style of world building, really, you know, where you're seeing all the different people of social classes, like you were saying. So yeah, I love reading that kind of stuff. It's really engaging. So please carry on with that.
And it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really cool for showing these big events as well, because it kind of can take you through an event in time and in space, you know, as people move and hand off the baton of the point of view, if you like, across this big event. So in the uprising in Baalbek, say, I hope that's not too big a spoiler, but you know, it kind of gets a sense of the size of the city and the size of what's going on and the range of people involved, how wild and chaotic it is. And so, you know, it does that in a way better than you ever could just with one person wandering through. You know?
Well, yeah, really, again, you're talking about stripping the romanticism from everything, and that really does, because you see how the chaos with everyone and how everyone reacts to it and how they're united in that chaos in one sense, but all very disparate at the same time. And it's awesome hearing where you get this kind of inspiration from. And I was wondering, were you inspired a lot by historical periods as well, and characters as well? Do you imagine someone who existed and kind of take traits from them and put them into your work, or is it something where it's all from your own head?
Well, I mean, certainly very much, you know, take inspiration from history. And I mean, you know, I suppose Age of Madness has got its influences on its sleeve quite a lot in terms of the Industrial Revolution. And, you know, a guy like, I suppose I'm not necessarily so influenced by individuals. You know, I don't necessarily think, oh, right, I'm going to do Robespierre in a dress. That's going to be... So I don't necessarily do like for like individuals. I don't look at those characters and think, oh, this person, the setting and the general feel. So, you know, someone like Swarbrick is a stand-in for some of the kind of demagogues and the crusading pamphleteers that were around in the French Revolution, you know. So definitely there are, you know, I'm thinking of that kind of person. I mean, Kernsbick is a sort of a Brunel, one of these great inventors, these great, you know, men of industry who were so popular and so successful and became such a feature of society in the Victorian era. So definitely picking out archetypes and kind of doing my versions of them. And, you know, I read an awful lot about the French Revolution, about the Russian Revolution, about the Industrial Revolution for these books. And that all finds its way in. And, you know, you'll pick up little events that happened that you can hardly believe happened often.
Yeah.
And those, you know, imitating those, doing your version of those definitely gives a kind of flavor of authenticity that you otherwise can't. So, I mean, there's an event where chimney sweep gets stuck in a flue.
Yeah.
And that happened. That's it was just an event that was relayed in one of the books that I was reading about the Industrial Revolution, and standard.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's as dark as history, is it? And, you know, I can imagine you write these dark scenes and then people are like, how could you think of this? And it's like, no, this really happened. So, you know, you can't.
Yeah, and I mean, stuff like, I read Engels' Condition of the Working Class in Britain, you know, and he talks about stuff like in the slums, they would chop the street up with fences and keep pigs in the street because, you know, you'd throw your scraps and your rubbish out into the street, the pigs would eat them, and then you'd fatten your pig up over time. And so they were just like these gigantic pig farms, big chunks of slums, you know, and you can hardly believe that was just standard in, you know, chunks of Manchester, but, you know, it was. And then you put it in a fantasy book, no one bats an eye, it seems like.
Yeah.
Standard.
They just think that you're sick for thinking of that idea.
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's normal. Yeah, absolutely.
I think we kind of noticed, didn't we? The relationship between Orso and Leo it could feel kind of like Prince Hal and Hotspur. You know, it plays perfectly into the idea of revolution, but in a different time period as well. So, you know, we're big history buffs because we do reenactment and all that kind of stuff. You know, you watch Christian Cameron's videos on Twitter about writing fighting, and it's so interesting. So we love how you take ideas from history and all that kind of stuff into your writing. So it makes it, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, Henry IV was very much like one element of this.
Yeah.
Amazing production of the histories, Shakespeare's histories.
Sure.
At the Roundhouse in London, and it was kind of all 8 plays over 2 weekends.
Wow.
So they did 3 on a Saturday, 1 on a Sunday, 3 the Saturday, 1 on a Sunday.
Wow.
Now the same cast, kind of constantly rotating. Brilliant staging in the round, and that had a big impact on me. And I'd studied Henry IV at school, and so that was kind of on my mind. But definitely that kind of basic setting of, you know, the incompetent king sort of past his best with the disappointing son who's spends all his time carousing with his idiot friends, and then up in the north there's this magnificent heroic figure, totally not gay, who is, you know, making Scots while beating the Scots. And so that was definitely the kind of impetus for the Leo Orso dichotomy. Although obviously it spins off in other directions over time.
So you kind of take that inspiration initially, but then they become their own kind of characters. But you go in with the foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Leo's obviously a kind of a certain sort of Hotspur. You know, he's not quite like Hotspur. He has the rashness and the impetuosity and the obsession with. He's kind of less effective, if anything. You know, and he's a bit more of a mummy's boy as well, I suppose. And then also is a sort of almost a bit more of a benign Hal. He's not quite so scheming. He's a bit more at the mercy of events, you know, and a bit more self-aware. He's sort of paralyzed by his own intelligence in a way. You know, Leo's dynamic and impressive because he's dumb.
He's
also
he believes he can do everything.
Worried about what might occur. You know, he's scared of his own power in a sense, I suppose.
I love that. Now, thinking of the historicalness, as it were, are you a big fan of the Total War games? We feel like we read these amazing quotes in the front of your books, and we can imagine, you know, we read the quotes on there when playing Rome Total War or something, and we're like, yeah, we need to write that down because that's so cool. Is that where you got some of the quotes from, or was it from something else?
I may have put maybe not a whole hour, but 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
In Total War at some time.
There's not much.
Probably put about 10,000 hours into those games combined. I mean, if there's one thing I've played more than any other, it is, I would say, Total War.
Yeah. It's addictive.
I mean, the original Shogun, I played for just days on end. In the days when I could just sit around playing video games for days on end.
Those 2D Kens.
Oh yeah, I absolutely love those.
Mm.
And I think, probably the sort of the feel about battles and how battles work is, slightly influenced by that as well as reading massive amounts of tedious military history.
So the two combined. That's awesome that you play Total War. It's such an addictive game because there is no end. As soon as one problem ends, another begins. It's like, I'll just play for a few more hours, and then the day after.
And as you're getting bored with it, you start thinking, oh, I know what would be interesting. Why don't I do that one that way?
Yeah.
Why don't I try doing that in that manner? Yeah, there's always something else to try, and very quickly they become kind of individual and different.
And now they've added civil wars, and it's just it's a disaster. Every campaign you have a civil war, but it's fun, isn't it?
Yeah. Dad's had to ban himself because he's got discipline to get with games until it comes to Total War. So yeah, Dad's had to ban himself from it.
Yeah, I mean, I for a long time couldn't have a computer capable of running any kind of strategy games. I mean, I was a terrible one for Paradox games as well. Europa Universalis and Crusader Kings and stuff like that. That's terrible for those as well. Terrible. And so, if you play The Last of Us on console, you have 34 hours of, nice, brilliant, tight narrative. You finish it, you go about your business. Total War is thousands.
Yeah.
I could read a book in that time, and so I can't have it around. It's too dangerous.
Yeah, no, we don't blame you. We want more books from you, selfishly. So
keep that Total War away
one day. Should we do some of our
I mean, epic though my campaigns on Total War are, I'm not sure they have the same broad appeal that books probably do.
Oh, you never know.
Unless you just directly translated that story into a book. Just had someone else writing it down as you're playing. Maybe that's for the future.
I should do that. Yeah.
But now I think Ed said we could go on to some questions we have from our patrons. I think there's 3 or 4. So I'll just roll some of them off. I've got them here. So Merrill Webster said, when as both a reader and a writer, did you really become aware of the power of well-placed, well-timed words, the subtlety of phrase, and well-crafted and tended story? So I guess that question is like, did it really jump out at you at a specific time?
Well, I think, I was lucky to have, my mum was an English teacher, and she was very widely read, knew a lot about books and a lot about English. And from very early on, she would read stuff to me and we'd discuss how it worked. So she'd read Christmas Carol to me when I was a kid, and we'd talk about it and how it worked. And, when I was young, we'd talk about the sort of big aspects of it, but as I got older, we'd talk about the detail of sentence and structure and language and rhythm and how things. Talk a lot about poetry in the same way as well. So I mean, I think it's always been sort of instinctive, something that I've been well aware of, how you put a sentence together, how you structure things. That's always been very much on my mind from long before when I started writing. I guess I became interested in writing myself because I was kind of, already found writing fascinating and was interested in it as a reader. So always, really, I would say.
Interesting then, it's kind of been cultivated just through your entire life, really, and then just come to fruition, really, when you've written your own projects.
Yeah, and I mean, sadly, I think there's a degree to which being a writer has slightly killed my love of reading. I find reading hard to enjoy in the same way that I did once. It's hard to turn off that analytic part of your brain. I spend so much time reading my own stuff, trying to think about how to really write it. So when I read other people's stuff, it's got to really get me before I start to just read it like a naive reader, before I start to just have fun with it. And so reading just often doesn't feel that fun anymore. I'd rather play Total War.
Does that make reading fantasy even harder?
Yeah, and I think the closer it is to what I do, the harder it becomes. So kind of cynical epic fantasy is extremely difficult for me to take seriously or to kind of enjoy reading. more esoteric styles of fantasy are easier. And, you know, I'll tend, most of what I read fiction wise will be, you know, I read some Victorian novels about the Industrial Revolution, or, you know, stuff about the French Revolution, and a lot of non-fiction. You know, most of what I read is non-fiction, somehow related to what I'm working on generally. So yeah, I don't read much anymore. I need at some point just to stop and read for a while,
Yeah.
but I don't enjoy it much. It's sad.
Yeah, I guess it must be hard when you're thinking of a next project, wanting to work on that inspiration. And also, as you said, that reading has changed since you've become a writer as well, because you're always analyzing it. So it must be hard, but hopefully you can learn to try and turn that off maybe.
I can imagine you get sent lots of books by your publishers as well to blurb.
I did. Yeah, until I didn't read them. So they still occasionally try.
Yeah,
they still occasionally try from time to time, but generally I find it very hard to get into them. There's the occasional thing that I do end up reading for one reason or another, but yeah, generally it's those appeals fall on stony ground. And because I'm a venomously ambitious sociopath with no feelings of shame or guilt, obviously, it's very hard for me to do anything that isn't in some way related to the success of my next project. You know, I always do feel like, if I'm reading something, it should be, you know, around what it should be, gathering ideas. It should be, you know, directed toward the next project. So I'm pretty bad that way.
But it's understandable as well, isn't it? Because obviously you're always thinking of that inspiration for the next step. And obviously it sounds like you really enjoy writing as well. So why would you delay that process? But yeah, great answer. Thanks to Merrill Webster who put that question forward. And on to our next one. So Icarus Abides. So he said, as someone who loves the twisted gallows humor that cuts through the tension in the first Law series, what comedic influences played a part in your own sense of humor and of that running through the books?
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. I mean, I don't know that I feel like there are comedic influences in quite the way there are, you know, influences on, say, the way I write Point of View or things like that. Like I can point to James Ellroy's LA Quartet as a book that I've read and was kind of like how this is done.
Yeah.
And he takes that point of view approach where he has several different protagonists of very different types, and he writes differently from different points of view, and he kind of has them come at the central nub of the book from these very different directions.
Yeah.
And I thought that's brilliant. And I can definitely point to that as, you know, something that inspired me. I'm not sure I can in the same way with humor, but humor is really weird. I mean, it's hard to say where it comes from. I mean, there's a lot of classic British humor like Blackadder and kind of
you can really see that.
Monty Python, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, that I certainly loved as a kid, but it's hard to say that has a similar feel to what I do, I suppose. I don't know. I mean, as I was saying earlier, everything you kind of watch and learn and take in has an effect on you.
Yeah.
But humor is such a personal thing, both what you find funny and, you know, the way you try and get a laugh from people. It's so weirdly personal and different.
Yeah.
And it's always odd to me. To me, the humor and is such an important part of anything that I read, you know. And going back to that interaction with voice and the sense of person, you know, the individuality of a sense of humor. It's very hard to pin down. And it always amazes me that a lot of people seem to read my books and just not really notice or care that it's funny.
Yeah.
You know, they don't find it funny. It's not of interest. You know, it's not something they comment on. And others will be like, I was amazed by that it's funny, you know, because I was expecting it to be grim and horrible, and I wasn't prepared for that. So people's reaction to it is always baffling.
Yeah. Well, humor is subjective, isn't it?
Oh, you know, if we mention a character's name in this house, we always start laughing because they've always got a moment where we're laughing out loud, whether it's you know, Gorst and his monologues and his voice or something like that, or, you know, a snide comment from Glockter,
or Pharaoh talking to Brother Longfoot.
Yeah, when she swears at Brother Longfoot, it's just one of my favorite moments in the series, and it's so fun. So yeah, like you say, humor is a big part of it as well.
Yeah, but thanks for another great question. And now on to our third one from the patrons. So this is from Kathleen Boyle. And she asked if you could steal a character from another writer to put into the first lore world, who would you pick? I mean, that's putting you on the spot quite a bit, but who would you pick?
Yeah, this one's a little bit like that question people sometimes ask, like, is there a book you wish you'd written? You know, and obviously I wish I'd written Harry Potter because then I could stop working. But writing so personal, you know, that it's very hard to imagine me writing Harry Potter. And so the idea that I would have written that kind of makes no sense in a way. And I think the idea of someone else's characters in my world, I mean, your mind goes to sort of some of George R.R. Martin's great characters, you know, I think are brilliant characters like Tyrion, you know, because he writes in a similar kind of vibe to me. So you can kind of imagine them being imported. It's a bit hard to imagine, you know, Bud White from LA Confidential being in one of my books, but I think he's a brilliant character. Or you know, Gus McCrae from Lonesome Dove, which is like absolutely superb, but with amazing, brilliant characters, but they don't really fit in my milieu. So, you know, in a way, the things that I respond to well tend to be things I would never think of. You know, I couldn't write Lonesome Dove because I don't have the experience, I don't have the authenticity that's there. And so it's because it's something I could never do that I find it so interesting. So there's no one's character I would steal. I don't think I would want to take, but there's many that I love and are very impressed by.
Good answer. And I love Lonesome Dove. Genius work, so good. And I definitely see the influences there that's had on, you know, your books, the way that people, you go from one character's perspective when they're together, and then you kind of head hop to someone else and you see their reaction. Kind of reminds me of the scene with in Best Served Cold when they're sitting around the table and Cosca and Morveer are kind of having at each other, and you see their perspectives, and it really reminded me of Lonesome Dove. So yeah, good stuff.
Awesome.
Oh, nice.
Inspiration.
Well, anything that reminds you of Lonesome Dove in my book.
Yeah, we love trying to spot influences. A lot of it is we might be imposing our favorite books on it when you haven't actually got inspiration from that, but it is awesome to hear that you do love works like Lonesome Dove. And I think I've heard you say before that you love Blood Meridian as well.
Yeah, Blood Meridian. I mean, love is maybe the wrong word for that book. I mean, it's a hard book to like.
Yeah,
but it hits you like a ton of brick.
Yeah, it's powerful.
It stays with you.
Is incredible. Yeah, the road. I mean, similarly, is a hard one to ignore, and you know, just the style. McCarthy's style is so unlike anything else. So kind of weirdly spare, but strangely baroque at the same time, and these weird rhythms. Just it feels like being addressed by a kind of barnstorming preacher. You know, there's this strange biblical kind of cadence to the whole thing. And I find whenever I read him, I end up writing like a crap Cormac McCarthy for a couple of days afterwards. You know, that's strong medicine. It's really hard to ignore. But he certainly is good, without a doubt.
I think quite a few people agree with you there as well.
Yeah, it's definitely unique for sure. And now I think this is our last question from the patrons, and this is from Rai FG, and he said, what book releasing in the next 6 months are you excited about aside from your own? So maybe that'll be harder because you said you do find it harder to read fantasy. But is there anything
aside from my own? And I mean, also I'm very untopical, you know, so it'll be things like, I might read Perdido Street Station now, which, you know, came out before I was ever published. You know, that's fresh and exciting. I mean, there's no reason why that can't be fresh and exciting. So I'm very untopical, but I suppose the one thing I have read quite recently that I was really impressed with was Gideon the Ninth. I don't know if you've read that.
No.
Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth, the sequel.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just a really... It's very unlike what I do, while at the same time being a little bit like, in the sense that really powerful and you know, very unlike anything else you'd read. It's just a bizarre, crazy world. It's a lot of fun. Doesn't take itself too seriously, but at the same time, you know, feels quite emotionally powerful. And so I think the third one of those is, I don't know if that'll be out in 6 months, but I think it's been turned in. So I suppose that would be one that I'm interested to see.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll pop it on the list. Oh, Joe, thanks so much for allowing us to interrogate you. Hopefully it wasn't like pulling teeth. But, you know, we've really enjoyed being able to ask you questions.
Yeah, pleasure. I quite enjoy pulling teeth.
I see the
As we can
influence now.
tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that was so much fun to get to chat with you, one of our favorite authors, and we can't wait to read A Wisdom of Crowds. And you know, guys, if you're watching, definitely go get it from the Broken Binding, because they've got
2 copies.
two copies. They've got some really nice signed editions, so go check them out. But you know, thanks again, Joe. You're a gent, and it's been a lot of fun.
It's been awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for coming onto the channel. We've loved it. I have read everything in the first law in about a month, so it'd be safe to say that I've been a bit obsessed. So it's just amazing being able to talk to you and ask
Nice.
some of these questions. So thanks again for coming onto the channel.
Oh, no. Thank you. No, it's been great to talk to you. Very incisive and interesting questions. So it's always nice to sort of dig into the details of the craft, as well as do that stuff about your favorite color and things, which is
Yeah.
quite a lot as a writer.
And the Disney endings, of course. So,
Of course.
Yeah.
Can't
Thank you
leave
for the
them out.
spoilers.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, in the meantime, everyone stay safe. Thank you very much, Joe Abercrombie, at Truth and Courage.
Truth and Courage, the brothers Gwynne.
Pleasure.